Know thou that the soul of man is exalted above, and is independent of all infirmities of body or mind. That a sick person showeth signs of weakness is due to the hindrances that interpose themselves between his soul and his body, for the soul itself remaineth unaffected by any bodily ailments. Consider again the sun when it is completely hidden behind the clouds. Though the earth is still illumined with its light, yet the measure of light which it receiveth is considerably reduced. Not until the clouds have dispersed can the sun shine again in the plenitude of its glory. Neither the presence of the cloud nor its absence can, in any way, affect the inherent splendor of the sun. The soul of man is the sun by which his body is illumined, and from which it draweth its sustenance. It should be so regarded. Baha'u'llah. If sorrow and adversity visit us, let us turn our faces to the kingdom, and heavenly consolation will be outpoured. If we are sick and in distress, let us implore God's healing, and He will answer our prayer. When our thoughts are filled with the bitterness of this world, let us turn our eyes to the sweetness of God's compassion, and He will send us the heavenly calm. If we are imprisoned in the material world, our spirit can soar into the heavens, and we shall be free indeed. Abdul Baha.
So today our speaker is Dr. May Badee, and her topic is mental health and healing, a Baha'i perspective. Dr. Badee is originally from Iran. She left Iran with her husband, Dr. Hooshmand Badee, in 1975 and lived in various countries before moving to the UK in 2001. May started working in the field of psychiatry in 1996 in St Vincent in the Caribbean, and then continued the same after moving to the UK. Currently, she lives in Scotland, where she works for the National Health Service as a consultant psychiatrist. So with that, I'll hand it off to Dr. Badee.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to present to you very briefly about Baha'i perspective on mental health and healing. I have to emphasize that this is very, very brief. Unfortunately, as important as the mental health is, it has not received a lot of attention from governments, people, or other organizations until recently. Not only it has not received much attention, it has also been a source of stigma for those who suffer from mental health problems. While working in the Caribbean, I remember that one of my friends, a dentist, told me that no doctor would ever agree to share the same office with me because they would lose their own patients. Nobody would come to see them for the fear of others thinking that they have come to see the psychiatrist. And indeed, we had patients who had been left in the psychiatric hospital for many, many years by their families after they were admitted there for some very minor mental health problems. The families found it so difficult to accept their relative back into their home, sometimes the person's own home. So with this presentation, I thought that after a very brief introduction to the Baha'i Faith, we can touch on the view of the Baha'i Faith and the nature of the human being. We can then go to the definition of mental health by the World Health Organization, after which we will explore some of the Baha'i writings around the causes of ill health, physical and mental, and methods of healing and support for people who may experience distress and mental health problems. I emphasize that this is very short introduction to the Baha'i Faith, and it's only to tell you very briefly about its really central figures, so you're familiar with the names I will mention, and a very brief reference to some of its relevant teachings. The Baha'i Faith is a world religion which began in 1844 by a young man called the Bab. Baha'is are followers of Baha'u'llah, who we believe is a messenger or a manifestation of God for this age. Baha'u'llah teaches us that God is unknowable in his essence, and he has created us all equal and has sent guidance to us through progressive revelation throughout the ages. The central figures of the Baha'i faith, Baha'u'llah, the Bab, and Baha'u'llah's eldest son and successor, Abdul Baha, have left a wealth of writings and teachings, some of which I will be sharing today. And as mentioned again, this is very brief. And if you like to know more about the Baha'i faith, you can visit the official Baha'i website at www.baha'i.org. So one of the fundamental teachings of the Baha'i faith is the principle of the harmony of science and religion. A beautiful analogy given by Abdul Baha is that of a bird. He says, we may think of science as one wing and religion as the other. A bird needs two wings for flight. One alone would be useless. Abdul Baha goes further to say that any religion that contradicts science or that is opposed to it is only ignorance. For ignorance is the opposite of knowledge. Religion and science walk hand in hand, and any religion contrary to science is not the truth. So before we think about healing and mental health, we need to think about our reality or our real nature. So I like to touch very briefly on the Baha'i thoughts about our real nature. And Baha'u'llah, in one of his beautiful mystical writings called The Hidden Words, tells us that we were created by God and that God's creation is perfect. He says, O son of being, with the hands of power I made thee, and with the fingers of strength I created thee, and within thee have I placed the essence of my light. Be thou content with it and seek naught else, for my work is perfect and my command is binding. Question it not, nor have a doubt thereof. Working in the field of psychiatry, or even as a general population, when we see someone with mental health problems, when we hear that they're aggressive or do things that are not terribly nice to other people, it's actually difficult to remember that they were also made perfect. And this is something that we need to keep reminding ourselves. So, okay, we are created perfect, but we also know that we're all different in character. And when Abdul Baha was asked, how many kinds of character are there in man? And what are the causes of the differences and variations among them? He responded, there are the innate character, the inherited character, and the acquired character, which is gained through education. As to the innate character, although the innate nature bestowed by God upon man is purely good, yet that character differs among men according to the degrees they occupy. All degrees are good, but some are more so than others. Thus, every human being possesses intelligence and capacity, but intelligence, capacity, and aptitude differ from person to person. In my understanding, it may mean that someone is great in art, someone is wonderful in music, someone in sciences, etc. In the last several years, we know that the World Health Organization has been paying more and more attention to addressing the issue of mental health and have made various statements around it. Interestingly, they also recognize the relationship of the innate, acquired, and inherited capacities, stating that individual, psychological, and biological factors such as emotional skills, substance use, and genetics can make people more vulnerable to mental health problems. Exposure to unfavorable social, economic, geopolitical, and environmental circumstances, including poverty, violence, inequality, and environmental deprivation, also increase people's risk of experiencing mental health conditions. So the new definition of mental health by the World Health Organization is very inclusive. They state mental health is a state of mental well-being that enables people to cope with the stresses of life, realize their abilities, learn well and work well, and contribute to their community. It is an integral component of health and well-being that underpins our individual and collective abilities to make decisions, build relationships, and shape the world we live in. Mental health is a basic human right, and it is crucial to personal, community, and socioeconomic development. Of course, they also explain that mental health is more than just the absence of mental disorders. It exists on a complex continuum, which is experienced differently from one person to the next, with varying degree of difficulty and distress, and potentially very different social and clinical outcomes. Okay, so it's time to look at sickness. And the first step in doing anything is acknowledging the reality. Abdu'l-Baha reminds us that although ill health is one of the unavoidable conditions of man, truly it is hard to bear. The bounty of good health is the greatest of all gifts. We've talked about how our real or innate nature is purely good and that God's work is perfect. However, here comes a challenge. We cannot avoid getting ill. I am not going to get into the philosophical debate as to why we get ill if we are perfect, because it's outside the remit of this discussion. We do, however, need to acknowledge that as human beings or animals, we are prone to illnesses, both physical and mental, and we cannot always escape them. Physical pain is necessary in all human existence, and as such, it's unavoidable. And as long as there will be life on earth, there will also be sufferings in various forms and degrees. For example, looking at a little child, while trying to learn to stand up and walk, the repeated falls helps it gain muscle strength to be able to stand up and walk. Another teaching that has been emphasized by Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha is that not only we are encouraged to consult a skilled physician, we are also reminded that we should maintain our health. Abdu'l-Baha states, according to the explicit decree of Baha'u'llah, one must not turn aside from the advice of a competent doctor. It is imperative to consult one, even if the patient himself be a well-known and eminent physician. In short, the point is that you should maintain your health by consulting a highly skilled physician. I know in this day and age, the era of Google Doctor and all the conspiracy theories on the internet, it's difficult to know who is skilled and who is not, and whose research is valid and whose isn't. Fortunately, however, in this day and age, people are better able to use their power of reasoning and hopefully won't fall into the trap of believing everything they read on the internet or hear from other people. Now that we know we were made perfect, but we are prone to illnesses. Let us look at the causes of sickness. Again, Abdu'l-Baha explains that there are two causes for sickness. One is material, the other spiritual. And if the sickness is of the body, a material remedy is needed. If of the soul, a spiritual remedy. Abdu'l-Baha goes on to explain the causes of sickness in very simple terms. The outer physical causal factor in disease, however, is a disturbance in the balance, the proportionate equilibrium of all those elements of which the human body is composed. To illustrate, the body of man is a compound of many constituent substances, each component being present in a prescribed amount, contributing to the essential equilibrium of the whole. So long as these constituents remain in their due proportion, according to the natural balance of the whole, there will be no physical cause for the incursion of disease. And Abdu'l-Baha goes on to explain, for example, the starch component must be present to a given amount, and the sugar to a given amount. So long as each remaineth in its natural proportion to the whole, there will be no cause for the onset of disease. When, however, these constituents vary as to their natural and due amounts, that is when they are augmented or diminished. It is certain that this will provide for the inroads of disease. We are all familiar with illnesses that are very obviously caused by a disturbance in equilibrium in the body, like high cholesterol, high or low blood sugars, high or low vitamin levels, etc. We're also aware that a lot of these lead to mental health problems. So when I was working in the Caribbean, I had to look after patients who had been admitted to the psychiatric unit because of bizarre behaviors and would not be taken back home, even though it turned out that at the time, their blood sugar was very low. Some years ago in UK, I admitted a 70-some-year-old woman to the psychiatric ward who had for some time behaved in an erratic manner and was appearing very depressed, not eating, not drinking, doing anything. We considered dementia or depression. However, the blood tests showed that her blood sodium level, the salt in her blood, was low. And she recovered after she was treated. Actually, she became so well that she started helping out in the dementia ward before she was discharged. Another example was a young 19-year-old girl who had become so depressed, not doing anything for herself, not getting out of bed, to the point that she had developed sores on her ears, on her face, on her elbows. It was just a really terrible state. However, we found out that her vitamin B12 level was low. And as soon as it was replaced and treated, she was fine and she got back to being her bubbly and energetic self. And these are just some of my personal experiences. So how do we re-establish this equilibrium? Abdu'l-Baha explains, now, the equilibration of these bodily components can be accomplished by one or two means, either through medicine or with foods. And when the constitution has recovered its equilibrium, the illness is banished. Since all the constituent elements of the human body are also found in plants, if one of these components were to become deficient, and if one were to partake of foods that are rich in that component, then equilibrium would be restored and the cure realized. So long as the aim is the equilibration of the component parts of the body, this can be equally affected through medicines or various foods. It's quite notable that rather than negating one and approving the other, Abdul Baha is telling us that both need to be used. Abdul Baha goes on to explain that the science of medicine is still in its infancy and has not yet reached maturity. But when it reaches that stage, treatments will be administered with things that are not repulsive to the senses of taste and smell. That is, through foods, fruits, and plants that have an agreeable taste and a pleasant smell. For the cause of the intrusion of illness into the human body is either a physical agent or a nervous excitement and stimulation. We are learning about the nutritional and medicinal values of various foods, fruits and plants. And I personally love the part that Abdul Baha says that these should have an agreeable taste and smell. It makes it important to pay attention when someone says they're repulsed by certain smells that someone else really likes. Garlic and onion are the best examples. Sometimes I wonder, people do not like, for example, garlic because their body does not need it, or it's not good for them, or because they don't like it, it's not good for them. I have no answer for this. We do still need to do lots more research on using foods and fruits as remedies, although I know that in many Eastern countries in particular, the use of alternative medicines is quite common. Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha talked about harmful effects of smoking and drinking at a time when people thought these were good. Abdul Baha advises us that experience has shown how greatly the renouncing of smoking, of intoxicating drink, and of opium conducive to health and vigor, to the expansion of keenness of the mind, and to bodily strength. Of course, the scientific studies have also proven the harm from these substances. As we discussed before, science and religion go hand in hand, and for healing, we would use both. As Abdul Baha tells us, there are two ways of healing sickness: material means and spiritual means. The first is by the treatment of physicians. The second consisted in prayers offered by the spiritual ones to God and in turning to Him. Both means should be used and practiced. Those who know Baha'is know that we are very big on prayers. So as soon as we hear somebody is unwell or something has happened to somebody, we immediately start praying for them at the same time as we try to help them and see what we can do. Abdul Baha goes on and says, illnesses which occur by reason of physical causes should be treated by doctors with medical remedies. Those which are due to spiritual causes disappear through spiritual means. Thus, an illness caused by affliction, fear, nervous impressions will be healed more effectively by spiritual rather than by physical treatment. Hence, both kinds of treatment should be followed. They are not contradictory. Therefore, thou shouldest also accept physical remedies, inasmuch as these too have come from the mercy and favor of God, who hath revealed and made manifest medical science, so that his servants may profit from this kind of treatment also. Thou shouldest give equal attention to spiritual treatments, for they produce marvelous effects. Here, Abdul Baha again affirms the need for physical healing while also talking about the concept of spiritual healing, encouraging this physician to bring happiness to his patients. He states, "O thou distinguished physician, praise be to God that thou hast two powers, one to undertake physical healing and the other spiritual healing. Matters related to man's spirit have a great effect on his bodily conditions. For instance, thou shouldest impart gladness to thy patient, give him comfort and joy, and bring him to ecstasy and exaltation. How often has it occurred that this had caused early recovery? Therefore, treat thou the sick with both powers. Spiritual feelings have a surprising effect on healing nervous ailments." We all see people who become severely ill after hearing the bad news, let alone people who have been through calamitous life events, like dealing with wars and losses of various kinds. We must remember that physical and spiritual healing may include, but are not limited to, use of medications. Another great advice from Abdul Baha to a physician about bedside manners. Until now, we were taught that bedside manners should include courtesy and kindness and compassion and attention to patients' needs. Abdul Baha adds making the patient happy to this, to be holistic and don't only pay attention to the physical illness, and always consider the great effect of happiness. He says, when at the bedside of the patient, cheer and gladden his heart and enrapture his spirit through celestial power. One has to be very aware of the effects of prayer, laughter and humor, music and arts on the patient's well-being. In his book, Baha'u'llah and the New Era, originally published in 1923, Dr. John Esselman, an early British Baha'i, writes, "The work of healing the sick, however, is a matter that concerns not the patient and the practitioner only, but everyone. All must help by sympathy and service, by right living and right thinking, and especially by prayer, for of all remedies, prayer is the most potent. Supplication and prayer on behalf of others," says Abdul Baha, "will surely be effective. The friends of the patient have a special responsibility for their influence, either for good or ill, is most direct and powerful." Notice how Dr. Esselman is incorporating principles of cognitive behavioral therapy and meditation here. Most of you have probably heard the joke about the deaf man who went to visit his sick friend. But as he was worried about difficulty hearing his friend, he prepared himself, expecting that, for example, when he asks his friend how he is, his friend would say, "He's doing well," and so on and so forth. I won't go to the rest of it. But things don't go as he had planned. And when he asks his friend how he is, his sick friend responds by saying, "I am dying." To which, of course, the deaf man, not having heard him, says, "Thank God." There is a bit more to this joke, of course, but I should just, it's enough to say that we need to visit the sick and we need to make them feel happy rather than more upset, as we have both abilities. Dr. Esselman further discusses the effects of environment. He says everyone is affected by the social atmosphere in which he lives, by the general prevalence of faith or materialism, of virtue or vice, of cheerfulness, of depression, and each individual has his share in determining the state of that social atmosphere. It may not be possible for everyone in the present state of the world to attain the perfect health, but it is possible for everyone to become a willing channel for the health-giving power of the Holy Spirit, and thus exert a healing, helpful influence both on his own body and on all with whom he comes into contact. So as a rule, when I see a patient for the first time, or when those who are already under my care become acutely unwell, I always consider if any environmental changes might have caused or contributed to the illness, and if any changes can be made to the environment or their physical health before considering prescribing medicines. And in many instances, the effects of the environment is actually overwhelming, and at times just minor changes, such as increasing social interactions, like going out and about, engaging in meaningful activities, listening to music, doing arts, or paying attention to their sleep hygiene, suffices to get them better. And talking about music, nowadays music therapy is gaining a lot more attention, although not enough. And I have seen the extent of the effects of music on patients firsthand. It is interesting to hear what Abdul Baha said about music over 100 years ago. After describing that the voice connects itself with the spirit, and the spirit can be uplifted by it, Abdul Baha goes on to say, in short, melodies, though they are material, are connected with the spiritual. Therefore, they produce a great effect. A certain kind of melody makes the spirit happy, another kind makes it sad, another excites it to action. All these feelings can be caused by voice and music, for through the nerves, it moves and stirs the spirit. Even over animals, music has an effect. For example, when they wish to take a camel over a desert road, they attach him some bells, or they play upon a flute. And this sound prevents him from realizing the fatigue of the journey. So he goes on to explain that whatever is in the heart of man, melody moves and awakens it. If a heart is full of good feelings and a pure voice are joined together, a great effect is produced. For instance, if there be love in the heart, through melody it will increase until its intensity can scarcely be borne. But if bad thoughts are in the heart, such as hatred, it will increase and multiply. For instance, music used in war awakens the desire for bloodshed. The meaning is that melody causes whatever feeling is in the heart. So we really need to be careful what kind of music we do listen to. Furthermore, Abdul Baha explains that some people are naturally kind, but they may be accidentally upset by a wave of anger. But if they hear music, the true nature will reassert itself. Music really awakens the real natural nature, the individual essence. With whatever purpose you listen to music, that purpose will be increased. For instance, there will be a concert given to the poor and unfortunate, and if you go there thinking of the aim, the music will increase your compassion and generosity. This is the reason why music is used in war. And so it is with all the things that cause excitation of the nerves. So here I will very briefly touch on some of the things that the Baha'i community does in helping those who need it. This is a picture of a part of the Baha'i House of Worship in Chile. And I thought it's an inspiring picture. The Baha'i houses of worship are much more than just places for prayers. Their functions include having various services around them, including but not limited to school, hospital, and orphanages. Therefore, this picture is very meaningful here. You may be aware that in the Baha'i Faith, we do not have individual leadership or priesthood. We do, however, have elected institutions at local, national, and international levels. Local spiritual assemblies functions, among others, involves pastoral care, paying special attention to anyone in the community who needs it. And this is not limited only to Baha'is and would be extended to all in the area, although at the moment, it may not always be possible depending on the number of Baha'is in each area. Individual Baha'is are also encouraged to follow in the footsteps of Abdul Baha and attend to the sick and offer services to the community in any capacity they can. Also, community building exercises such as offering charitable services, spiritual education and empowerment programs for children, junior youth, and youth, preparing them for crisis in life are among some of the activities. Of course, as with any other religious group, close family ties and supporting each other at hard times are part of the Baha'i community life. This may not be very visible or needed in the more developed countries, but for example, in Iran, where a big portion of the population is suffering from poverty, and in particular, a lot of the Baha'is have lost their livelihood because of the persecution by the government, they look after each other and support each other. So to recap, we know that the Baha'i Faith teaches harmony of science and religion, that we have been created perfect but cannot avoid getting sick, that sickness can be of two kinds, physical or spiritual, and we should consult a skilled physician when we are ill. We also learn that treatments can be through medicines and foods and fruits with agreeable taste and smell. Sicknesses caused by spiritual causes will need spiritual remedies, which can be through love and compassion shown by others, as well as prayers. This is a picture of a community building activity. Now, I like to finish this talk by this prayer by Abdul Baha, which can be used at times of difficulties. O divine providence, perplexing difficulties have arisen and formidable obstacles have appeared. O Lord, remove these difficulties and show forth the evidences of thy might and power. Ease these hardships and smooth our way along this arduous path. O divine providence, the obstacles are unyielding, and our toil and hardship are conjoined with a myriad adversities. There is no helper save thee, and no succorer except thyself. We set all our hopes on thee and commit all our affairs unto thy care. Thou art the guide and the remover of every difficulty, and thou art the wise, the seeing, and the hearing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Badee, for sharing your insights with us. We learned a lot. So everyone can put their questions in the chat now. We'll have some time for that. First question is, what if you are prescribed opiates for pain? Is there an alternative natural option?
I'm not the best to answer about natural options, but we know that opiates, when someone takes them for pain, it does not cause the problems that it would cause otherwise. And we know also that Baha'u'llah says that when something is prescribed by a doctor, then it's okay to take it. So as long as we don't overdo it, and as long as we don't continue to use it when we don't need it, it's absolutely fine.
The next question is, what about mental health issues caused by trauma, violence, abuse, etc.?
So those are the bits that Abdul Baha talks about, by the things that have happened because of afflictions and problems in life. And these are best treated with spiritual remedies. I know that sometimes we do prescribe antidepressants, for example, to people who have or who have developed post-traumatic stress disorder. However, the best form of treatment for these people is probably cognitive behavioral therapy and other kinds of behavioral therapies as opposed to medication. But again, Abdul Baha says we should not leave one and look at the other. It will have to be decided depending on the person's need at the time as to which one, and if both are needed, both are needed. Thank you for asking easy questions.
Well, easy for you, not easy for us.
The cognitive behavioral therapy is gaining more and more evidence as to how good it works for various forms of mental health problems. And it's something that when you look at the Baha'i writings, it's very much corresponds with it, about recognizing what's the issue and recognizing our behaviors and dealing with what's at hand at the time by changing our behavior or thinking or whatever. Sorry, go on.
Thank you. So the next question is, can you please expand on how these Baha'i programs for children, junior youth, and youth help them holistically and with their mental health?
Okay, so these programs for example, the classes for children teach the children about attributes of God, values that they have to learn. For example, kindness, compassion, generosity, love. All of these, the children are practicing and learning to live by, and also to learn that they have to love everybody. So when the children are learning from very young age that no matter what someone does or behaves like, because let's face it, we don't always meet people who are the kindest and nicest people. However, they may have their own issues and their own mental health problems, hence the reason why they behave not in a nice way with us. So once we have learned as children how to deal with difficulties and what our spiritual self is all about, then when we grow older, it becomes easier. For the junior youth, the program is usually just spiritual empowerment of the junior youth. And these junior youth, I don't want to call them children because they're no longer children at that age, between 11 and 15. They are at a point that they're learning about life, and they're going through difficulties of changes in their own life, and they are affected by what's happening in the society and all the forces in the society that pull them different ways. And through this spiritual empowerment program, they learn to take time to make friends, to think, to meditate, and to decide as to what's the best way forward for them. Hope that answered the question, at least partly.
Yes, it did. Thank you. Okay, I'll ask a question. So what if someone is feeling like they're in such a bad mental state that they can't take these other steps that you went through, like, and it becomes a cycle of they feel worse, and then, what would you recommend?
See a doctor. I think that the problem is, I kind of touched on, is the stigma is so terrible that people generally are very hesitant to go and see a doctor and say, I am not enjoying life, I hate my life, or things are really tough. People worry about saying that because then they feel that other people will look at them differently, and other people will say, they have a problem. And unfortunately, sometimes people take too long before they actually go and see somebody. And sometimes they see too many doctors because they go to one, they don't hear what they want to hear, and they go to the next one. And sometimes they go, I mean, I have people come and I suggest something, and then they go and check Google Doctor or Google and come back and say, no, that's not right. This is it. So we need to learn, we need to acknowledge that as human beings, we will get sick, whether it's mental health problem or physical health problems. Unfortunately, people won't go to see a doctor if they have mental health problems, but if their blood pressure is high, they would go to the doctor. If they have pain somewhere, they go to the doctor, but mental health problems do not show itself by having physical pain, or sometimes it does not show itself physically either, unless someone is severely depressed and is bedridden and wouldn't get out of bed because they're so depressed. It doesn't necessarily show itself. So many people with a lot of mental health problems do go through life continuously suffering without actually getting help. And of course, the other thing that I mentioned is about prayers. Prayers are absolutely most important, and not just me saying prayer for myself, but asking others to say prayers. When someone gets physically ill, we all email each other and WhatsApp each other and say, so-and-so is in hospital or is not well, please say prayers. But when someone has a mental health problems, people hesitate to say anything and don't want to ask other people to say prayers. And I can understand that. But at the same time, it's important to be able to acknowledge that as human beings, we are prone to becoming ill, and that may include mental health problems, and we need to get help if we need to get help.
Thank you. In cases of celiac disease where malabsorption has contributed to anxiety and depression, besides the importance of being gluten-free, what besides prayer can help with this?
I think a lot of cognitive behavior therapy, changing in thinking, recognizing your thinking, recognizing your behaviors, recognizing, what sorts of things are making you feel more anxious and then dealing with those rather than avoiding the anxiety-provoking situations, but dealing with problems, and those should help. If there is a need for medication, again, Abdul Baha says, you can use medication, you should, but it's not something that anybody can just say, oh, you absolutely have to take some medication. It would depend on the doctor after making a thorough assessment.
Thank you. Could you expand on spiritual healing? What do we mean by spiritual?
Well, spiritual healing, I touched on it very briefly, but again, Abdul Baha talks about the spiritual healing being of various kinds. I didn't want to make the talk too long, so I didn't go on that. But he talks about possibility of good health actually being passed from one person, from a healthy person to the ill person, through magnetism, because we all have that magnetism. So Abdul Baha talks about if someone holds, for example, his hand over this person's, wherever it hurts, and directs all of his attention to healing this person, and the sick person being fully expecting to get better, then it has results. But these are all very slow, although the ultimate spiritual healing comes from the Holy Spirit. So basically, prayers. However, love and compassion from the friends is also extremely important.
Thank you. So someone's asking, isn't calling a mental health illness a spiritual illness actually negative to like the stigma around mental health?
I think we are kind of looking at different entities here. So spiritual illness is probably more referring to the illness of the mind rather than the soul, because as you know, the quotation that you read at the beginning, Bita read at the beginning, Abdul Baha talks about the soul is not affected. When we are ill, the soul is not affected. Our mind may not be necessarily in touch with reality. Our body may be physically unwell, but our soul is actually free from illness, and the soul is still there. And Abdul Baha gives the example, the light is still lighted, but it's just not being seen, or the sun is there, but the cloud is covering it, so we can't see the emanations from the soul. But so when we say spiritual illness, we're not really talking about someone who is a bad person. Let's put it that way.
Okay, well, looks like that's it. Thank you, Dr. Badee, again, for coming here and giving us your time and your expertise. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for the very good questions.
So next week, our speaker will be Dr. Behruz Sabet, and his topic will be Some Answered Questions of Abdul Baha at a Glance. So again, these are every Saturday at 12 p.m. Eastern time. And if you're not on our mailing list, I put a link to our contact form in the chat. And we'll end with a quotation by Abdul Baha set to music.
utter peace. He verily, verily hath dominion over all things. He verily, verily hath dominion over all things. Rely upon God, trust in Him, praise Him and call Him continually to mind, continually to mind, continually to mind. He verily turneth trouble into ease, and sorrow into solace, and toil into utter peace. He verily, verily hath dominion over all things. He verily, verily hath dominion over all things. He verily, verily hath dominion over all things. He verily, verily hath dominion over all things.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Thank you very much.